We will start with the Champions League. In Manchester City were pushed to their physical limits against Atletico Madrid, but withstood their full-blooded encounter to hang on to a 0-0 draw and reach the semi-finals.
Yeah, City proved that they could withstand the expected aggressive tactics from Diego Simeone's team, including headbutts, a bit of hair pulling. But it may have come at a cost because Kevin De Bruyne and Kyle Walker both went off injured. Pep Guardiola has said that they are now in, quote, big trouble. Well, there was a particular focus on the clash of styles between the teams and the managers. The game unfolded in the way many expected. Atletico were really physical. They appeared to target Phil Foden. And it boiled over in the 89th minute when Felipe appeared to kick out at Foden, and that sparked a mass brawl.
Yeah, Felipe was shown a second yellow card, while in the melee, former City defender Stefan Savic pulled the hair of substitute Jack Grealish. He also appeared to headbutt Raheem Sterling. He was only shown a yellow card. 12 minutes of stoppage time followed and Atletico nearly forced an equaliser, but City clung on to set up that semi-final with Real Madrid.
Muchísimo. No esperaba otra cosa. Lo dije en rueda de prensa. Sería un partido completamente distinto. Y en el descanso lo hemos hablado. Ahora viene lo peor, lo más duro. La fatiga de nuestro partido de Liverpool hace 3 días, el viaje. Y en eso hemos de tener el balón. Y en la segunda parte nos han pasado por encima. Y si hubieran hecho un gol, probablemente no estaríamos aquí sentados diciendo que el City está clasificado.
Well, the ill feeling continued after the game, with the teams having to be separated in the tunnel by officials and staff before the police got involved.
Well, looking forward, City continue to target the treble this season, but those injuries to Kevin De Bruyne and Kyle Walker has left their chances in big trouble. That's according to Guardiola. He said this: "We are in big trouble. We played 3 days ago in a tough game against Liverpool, travel here, and we have a lot of injuries right now. I don't know what's going to happen over the next weeks." However, he wasn't prepared to criticise Atletico's aggressive tactics.
I've got to ask you about what happened at the end of the game, though. Did the Atletico Madrid players cross the line in terms of what's acceptable?
Nothing to say.
Could Phil Foden, did he have a cut on his head? And did he feel that was a red card offence in the first half?
No, don't talk about referees and the opponents neither.
Could I ask, when you went down the tunnel, was that beer you had thrown on you?
I don't talk about referees. The action was, everyone saw the action and that's all. So, nothing to say.
I know you said you don't want to comment on what happened at the end, but can I ask why that is? Because it did seem pretty clear.
No, I don't have anything to say about that.
But it did seem your team weren't the aggressors.
No, I don't want to say anything. No. Dinner today, come back to England to prepare the FA Cup semi-final.
Well, as we mentioned, there has been a lot of focus on the clash of styles between the two teams and the two managers particularly. Simeone has constantly defended his own style of play, and he's suggested that he's been disrespected by Guardiola.
Yeah, Simeone says he has been praised with disdain, but Guardiola is adamant that is not true.
Bueno, no tengo por qué opinar y creer que uno hable mal o bien. Muchas veces aquellos que tienen un gran léxico son muy inteligentes y logran alabarte en un desprecio. Pero bueno, no somos tan tontos tampoco los que quizás tenemos un poco menos de léxico.
Y han sido ustedes que decían que el ciclo de Cholo Simeone es igual. Eran ustedes, hace 3 o 4 meses. Eran 3 o 4 meses. Decían que cuando no conseguían ganar, eran ustedes. A mí no me lo imputen, Yo siempre he tenido buenas palabras de elogio a esta institución y a este equipo. Y el Cholo puede jugar como quiera, solo faltaría.
Well, Ben Ransom was at the Wanda Metropolitano Stadium last night. Ben, good to talk to you this morning. It was a really tense game. It boiled over towards the end and afterwards. How did you see it all unfold?
Yeah, look, it was a really hostile atmosphere last night from the get-go, really. The Atletico Madrid fans came to try and play their part in making it uncomfortable for Manchester City. And the tone was set probably in the first half. Felipe, the man who ultimately got sent off, he flattened Phil Foden in the first half, came right through the back of him. Phil Foden was lying on the pitch for a good minute or two. pretty motionless. So that's when he had to have his head bandaged. And at the time we thought, well, could that have been a red card? It was a yellow card. But that, as I say, set the tone for the aggression that Atletico were bringing to last night's proceedings. They were clearly trying to ruffle Manchester City. I remember Kevin De Bruyne being on the receiving end of a few rather late tackles. And then the melee itself all happened because it was Felipe again on Foden, kicked out at him. It was then Stefan Savic, former City player. He ran over to get involved. He tried to manhandle Phil Foden off the pitch when he was laying there injured, and that sparked the brawl. And you're absolutely right with what you say. We could see it unfold in the corner as all of the players, substitutes, people off the bench got involved. And it was aggressive in there. It wasn't just a sort of brawl where there's a little bit of pushing and shoving and it all dies down. There were a good few minutes of people getting involved. We've seen the pictures of Savic putting his head into Raheem Sterling. We've seen Savic pulling Grealish's hair after they had a verbal altercation there. It was pretty nasty, it has to be said, and pretty disgraceful scenes when you consider what was at stake and the eyes of the world being on such a game. We spoke in the build-up. Pep Guardiola, Diego Simeone were both asked about the potential for Atletico to try and disrupt. We've seen it in previous games where they have, been clever. We call it the dark arts, don't we? Just the way they kind of get an emotional reaction out of an opposing team. Well, last night did go above that. Pep Guardiola was showered with bottles as he ran down the tunnel. As the other City players were leaving, that's when again, the pushing ensued again because the melee happened maybe a few minutes before the end of the regulation 90. There were 9 and more added minutes on the back of that. When the final whistle went, the City players celebrated. There were clearly some more verbal altercations going on between the two sets of players, but it was going down the tunnel where it all kicked off again. Guardiola, as I say, went down. Security were doing their best to get the Manchester City players down the tunnel. Just as they were, just as they were disappearing from view, you saw the players come together again. Savic ran in chasing Grealish, and then you saw the police. They were actually with riot shields by the side of the pitch. There were 4 or 5 of them dressed like that, charging into the tunnel afterwards. And the pictures have since emerged as to the altercations that were going on in there and the police having to get involved. And let's be honest, as much as both teams were trying to win the game, as much as Atletico were trying to provoke an emotional reaction, I think we can all agree it's crossed the line when the police are having to get involved in the tunnel.
Ben, you asked Simeone if he was happy with the conduct of his players, of course, and it was quite difficult to watch in some ways, wasn't it? The intimidation, and you really had to feel for the City players, particularly in that melee at the end with all the antics.
Exactly that. And look, the City players, I think, can come out of this with their heads held very high because they were put under the most extreme pressure. Not just what I'm talking about there, about trying to provoke that emotional reaction, but also in the game itself, because Atletico actually played really well. And we were losing sight of that a little bit because of what went on afterwards. They played well, they dominated the chances, particularly in the second half. City couldn't get the ball, they couldn't get out, and they were put under a lot of pressure. But that, obviously, there comes a line with that pressure, and we saw that boil over, and exactly that, I put it to Diego Simeone. I was the only English journalist to actually be allowed to ask him a question, to ask him whether he felt that was right. And he did that thing where he was almost challenging me to suggest what I was getting at, because he looked at me initially and said, in what way? And I pointed out, well, the aggression. I pointed out maybe the incident with Savic and Grealish. And he said, well, look, that's down to the referee to implement justice. So he does take a proportion of the responsibility, of course, for that. But then equally, he was talking about the pride he has in his players. He wanted them to go and show that side of their character. I think he realised, he was quite open about how he felt the two teams were ranked and that Manchester City were far superior in so many ways. This Atletico team, you can't lose sight of the fact, is not the same one that we saw a few years ago. They're not as effective. They haven't been getting the results. It has been difficult, and he's faced quite a lot of criticism here in Spain for his performances in recent weeks and months. Well, I think last night it was a little bit different. I think everyone in the stadium was full of pride. Look, they got a standing ovation as they left the pitch, the Atletico players. But for Pep Guardiola and his players to come through that and reach a third Champions League semi-final, second consecutive, they can make the final again for a second consecutive year and keep their treble hopes alive. You feel they can come through very, very tough tests if they can rise above the challenge that was presented at the Wanda Metropolitano last night.
And of course, Ben, we're seeing how the British press have reacted, what they're reporting this morning, kind of praising City, not talking particularly well about Atletico Madrid. I just wonder what the Spanish press have been saying about it all.
Well, we got a sense as to what they might be saying last night. You can always judge by the reporter questions. I mean, look, you heard some of myself and some of my British colleagues talking to Pep Guardiola, asking him the questions and him refusing to get involved in what happened at the end. But obviously our focus was all on those scenes, pretty disgraceful scenes at times. The Atletico press, when they were speaking to Koke first of all, the midfielder, and then latterly Diego Simeone, a lot of it was about pride, a lot of it was about the trying to build up the apparent criticism that they felt had come from Pep Guardiola in the build-up. Well, actually, I don't think that's quite fair, because Guardiola was trying not to get involved. They were trying to tease him into criticising the style of Simeone, but he wasn't doing that. He was praising their defensive ethic, and he tried to clarify that last night. But as far as the questions to Simeone were concerned, it was about the pride and the performance, and that's reflected in the papers here in Madrid today. Marca, obviously, the famous sports publication. Last night, after the game was finished, the player ratings were put out on the website, and they came out with the headline, "The world needs a leader like Savic." So clearly they were in his corner, and given that this was a player who, as I say, was involved in an altercation with Foden on the floor, put his head into Raheem Sterling, and also was seen pulling Jack Grealish's hair, even before what went on inside the tunnel. And then this morning, Marca's gone with the front page, Corazon sin premio. Apologies for my pronunciation, but that translates as heart without the prize. And that is the feeling that the Atleti players put everything into this. They showed courage, they showed that spirit, that fighting spirit to try and get through. They were competitive, they tried to get through what was always going to be a really difficult tie, and they come out with their heads held high, according to the press here. I think it's also pertinent that they've got a picture of Savic putting his head into Raheem Sterling to accompany that headline. So clearly here, I don't think they feel that they did cross the line, although obviously UEFA are now looking at that. And given that I was inside the stadium last night, there were certainly moments where a number of different individuals did cross the line.